it's hard to imagine people being engaged and committed to the workforce without feeling like there's good and consistent communication from the leadership all the way down.
Hi, everybody. Welcome. This is PeopleMetrics Live, and today we're going to be talking about employee experience, which is sometimes also known as EX. And the title of today's session is How Can You Improve Internal Communications for a Better Employee Experience? Before we dive into this, I just want to do some quick introductions. Like I said, my name is Madeline, and I'm the marketing manager here at PeopleMetrics, and I'm joined here today by Sean and Kirk. So why don't you both introduce yourselves to everyone?
Hey, everybody. I'm Sean McDade, founder and CEO of PeopleMetrics. Nice to be here.
And hey, everybody. I'm Kirk Lobauer. I've been working as an analyst and a project manager on many of these employee experience projects for about 8 years here, so I'm here to give that expertise.
Awesome. So before we begin, just really quick background on PeopleMetrics Live. We've been doing customer and employee experience measurement here for a long time, as Kirk and Sean said, and we recently launched PeopleMetrics Live as a way to provide answers to a lot of the questions that we've received over the years about both of those types of programs, and also to answer your questions that you have about customer experience and employee experience. So the Q&A is open. Any questions that you want to ask, we'll be happy to take a look and answer those. And we do have 2 more sessions coming up after this. There's one next Tuesday and one next Thursday. They're both at 2 p.m. Eastern, and you can sign up for those by going to peoplemetrics.com/events. And that's also where you can catch a lot of the recordings, all the recordings of the previous sessions that we've done of PeopleMetrics Live as well. So, all right, let's jump in. Today, we're talking about how to improve internal communications for a better employee experience. You guys take
let me set the tone here about, first of all, we always like to talk about this. Why is employee experience important, right? So, employee experience is something that has a lot of positive outcomes for organizations when they do it right. So typically employees have a great experience. They stick around longer, so you don't have to replace them, right? They recommend your company to others and recruit more like them if they're good employees. They're people who tend to deliver a better customer experience too. So if they're customer facing, the customers enjoy working with folks who are enjoying their experience at work. So that tends to lead to more loyal customers who buy more, who recommend you. And hopefully that leads to profitability and things like that. So just setting the tone on why we're even talking about employee experience, that's why. Anything you want to add to that, Kirk, on the importance of that? Experience.
Sure, and I think HR people generally get it. I think, of course, there's an inherent worth to it. You want to make sure that the employees and you as an employer are having an enjoyable experience in your day-to-day, 8 hours a day. However, if you're looking for something beyond that inherent worth, it shows dividends. It's very easy, as Sean said, to say enjoyable experience leads to employee retention, leads to how you approach the customer, leads to customer loyalty, and it builds and builds, and an employee experience is the base of it all.
So if you want to have a great employee experience with engaged employees, and we've been doing this a long time, as Madeline said, since 2001. So we're 20 years old starting, I guess, January officially next year, which we'll have to do a special PeopleMetrics Live for that day. Maybe we'll just do PeopleMetrics Live all day that day.
Yes.
So everybody can see us celebrating the 20-year anniversary. But ever since I started this company and before I did work in this area, measuring how engaged and committed employees are to the workplace, internal communications has always been, and I think will always will be, one of the top, what we call drivers of that experience. So meaning when internal communications is good, you tend to have engaged employees. When internal communication is perceived to be poor, you have disengaged employees and a poor employee experience. And I was joking with Kirk, we do a prep call on this before PeopleMetrics Live, just so we can kind of figure out what we're going to talk about. And I told him, our clients could save a lot of money and just not do an employee survey and just focus on internal communications, because that it's going to be something that's really important and will drive the employee experience. So here's my Madeline, as always, says, get something out there controversial in the beginning, and I'm going to do this. I'll say this. So you don't have to do an employee survey to focus on internal communications, but the opinion that I want everybody to think about is this. even when you think you're communicating too much, you're not communicating enough to your employees. There is no such thing as over communicating with regard to your people. And most companies that we've seen don't do it enough, no matter how much they do. So I'll throw it back to you, Kirk, and let you react to that.
Yeah, thinking to what you just said, I don't think I've ever really seen or communicated to a client. The issue is you're communicating too much. You know, we've heard from your employees, your communication scores are low because they're just overwhelmed with how informed they feel. That's never the case. It's always communication is important to employees. It's always a driver, and it's always going to be something to focus on because despite how informed you are as either an HR lead or someone in a C-suite position, your employees don't feel that that's been transferred down to them.
So Kirk, we're certainly in a different world in November 2020 than we were, say, in February 2020. Is internal communications more or less important now than before this pandemic hit us?
It's definitely going to be more important now in a post-pandemic world. And the reason communication is so fundamental is, like all things, you want to have a degree of certainty and a degree of understanding in your day-to-day kind of life and work. And it tends to be an employee experience that anytime there's a massive change at the company, that comes with a massive dip in scores. And one of the main things that takes a hit is communication around these changes. Historically, you're going to see this around either we've added a new product line or we've had a change in leadership and we don't feel like we totally understand what's going on here. In 2020, it's been there's a massive change. We're all working remotely and we don't understand all these new variables of what are the expectations, how long are we going to be working remotely, or if it's in person, how is this in-person structure working? And so communication of a change is very important and is ongoing in the pandemic.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's never been more important. The mode of it is different, right? So there may be less face-to-face communication, if any at all. But the messages that are coming through have never been more important. So whether your now message is being delivered through, Slack or Teams or Zoom calls or whatever it is, that doesn't really matter. What matters is how often are you communicating? What are you saying? And are these communications filtering throughout the organization, right? And we'll talk a little bit about that in a minute as some suggestions. But, it's not like, hey, we may not be seeing each other anymore, so I don't need to communicate as much. The answer is you have to communicate more and more often.
Yeah, absolutely. And those are, as far as how we're thinking communication has changed in 2020, those are going to be the two big differences is the mode of communication, how you're reaching out to employees, and secondly, the frequency of communication, where if you haven't adjusted that frequency so it's more often, then chances are you've fallen behind.
Right. We talked a little bit about managers and leadership in terms of communicating in these days. Kirk, do you think there's any difference or differences that our audience should be aware of those two groups of people, like let's say the senior leadership versus managers around their communication, especially now that so much has changed?
Yeah, absolutely. And the core thing is there's going to be something different communicated at every level. Not this thing that a manager wants communication about is not going to be the same thing that a frontline employee wants communication about. And similarly, there's just communication up too. So the communication to C-suite isn't necessarily going to be the same thing. So each audience needs to have that communication dictated based on what is it that they are most concerned of or interested in at the moment. And so that is distinct at every level.
I mean, I think everybody is in the same boat where the way they communicate is now just different. And leadership, I don't think what leaders and managers are communicating is much different than it was. It's still leadership sets the tone. Managers then break that into realistic steps that people can follow that impact their role and their job. They may be communicating a little bit about remote work more, of course, about changes there. But just in general, where is the company going? How is the competition? What are our results look like? What are some things we need to look out for? What are we excited about in terms of the future? These are all things that were around before COVID, will be around after we get a vaccine. Like, this internal communication is never going to go away. And I would argue it's the foundation of a great employee experience and an engaged workforce. It's hard to imagine people being engaged and committed to the workforce without feeling like there's good and consistent communication from the leadership all the way down.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think to add to that, when we did a webinar on the employee experience earlier this year, one of the things that we spoke to was there's going to be different drivers that can be generational as far as what members of your team care about. There are different drivers by kind of role that you have in the company. That communication needs to be tailored. The way I do tend to think about it, and what that we want to emphasize, is that communication is going to happen regardless of whether or not you do it. If there's something that an employee cares about, they're going to be talking to their peers, they're going to be talking to their managers, and they're going to be coming up to their own conclusions, even if it's just based on their own thoughts, regardless of whether or not you communicate this information. So if you're looking to get that communication right, you need to be aware of what is it that kind of this employee cares about, and make sure that that's communicated with frequency.
Let's get into some specific best practices that we've seen over the years on organizations that have really done a good job with internal communications, because I think those are, hopefully our audience is looking for things that are tangible. And the first one that I'm going to throw out there is leadership needs to set a good example. So leadership, whenever we do these employee experience and engagement surveys, internal communication is really important, and leadership communication as a separate item is super important. So, and trust in leadership's communication is another factor in this. So there's nothing more important than leadership setting the tone and making sure they're consistently communicating to the organization, right? And even if the messages are repeated over and over again, that's okay. And I've yet to see an organization with high employee engagement scores with low scores on leadership communication and trust of leadership communication. So setting that good example from the top is the foundation to great internal comms. Because if the leaders aren't doing it, then certainly the managers reporting to them won't be doing it.
Yeah, and I think one thing I would add to that from a best practice perspective is often this can start with defining your channels of communication. How are we reaching out to employees? That's going to be different for every organization, and that's going to change now in the pandemic as well. But even thinking back to PeopleMetrics, a long time ago when I first started the company, even if you do this and you focus on this all the time, you need to stay focused on it because you can trip up on it. One of the first surveys I took as an employee at PeopleMetrics, one of our low scoring items was internal communication. And at the time, we didn't have very good internal communication channels. And what we did to activate or to change that was we incorporated Slack into our organization. That made it easy, not just for employees to communicate, and we didn't just stop there, but we started a kind of leadership communication channel where updates are now posted regularly every week now to our company of here is follow-ups from leadership meetings and kind of our next steps, next thoughts on what the company is doing. And as such, of course, following that survey, following those changes, communication really was much improved.
I think ironically, like our communication at PeopleMetrics, internal communication is better than it's ever been because of the remote part of it. We've been remote since March. And, when we were together in person, I think it was easy to have these just simple conversations between people that we would see and not have as many formal company meetings. But ever since we've gone away and been remote, we've had a meeting every Monday morning, just as a check-in. We've had a meeting every Friday afternoon, all hands. We'll get into a little bit of a piece of that I think is relevant later. And we've been consistent with setting up updates in Slack every week after our leadership meeting. So those are things that I think have really improved. And those are simple tactics any organization can implement. But I think the main point we're saying is communication needs to be frequent, consistent, and hopefully high quality. There's important information conveyed. So that's our first recommendation.
Absolutely.
Now, the second one is about helping team members be respected, right, Kirk? That's something that's super important with internal communications.
Yeah, and there's a couple aspects of that kind of making team members feel respected. And an essential part of any communication is a sense of trust and respect that comes from that.
Yeah.
If I don't feel these communications are reliable, then they won't mean much to me. So there is that sense of you need to follow through and communicate this relevant information. Second part of that respect is the communication is two-way. We are just describing this as communicating what's going on in the company as a description, but communication by definition is we get to respond back to this, which is why employee surveys are a core part of communication as well. Even thinking back to that PeopleMetrics example I gave of years and years ago, the fact that we had an employee survey set up that communication channel for us to say, there are things that we want more updates on and allows you to respond. And once leadership then responds, that sets the precedent of you are respected, you are heard, and you can trust that if you convey information to us, we're going to listen to it and act on it as best we can.
Right. I mean, there's no doubt communication by definition is two-way, right? It's not one way. And the best way to get, we think, feedback from employees is to set up a safe place for them to provide it, right? And when we say safe, we mean their ability to provide truthful, anonymous feedback that they can share with the organization. And then the key is that organization acknowledges it and then identifies a item or two to focus on and then works on it and communicates how that's going. Surveys are the thing that, like you said, Kirk, are the most common piece. There are a lot of different ways you can do that these days. Back in the day, there was this huge annual event survey that sent out to everybody, and it took a long time to do, and there was tons of questions. Now we see more shorter pulse surveys that happen more often, on a quarterly basis, so you can get an idea of what people are thinking about. But the key part of this in terms of internal communication is you're getting feedback from employees, but what's most important is you're acknowledging that feedback has been received, and you communicate back to the employees, hey, this is what we've heard, and this is what we're going to do. Like that, I think we've seen this over and over again, with our clients. It's like, it's a lot of work to pull off a good employee survey, right? You have to ask the right questions. You have to send it out timely. You have to answer questions. You have to make sure people who didn't get the invite get it. You get all of these results back, and you're like, whew, now this is over. But no, that's when it's just beginning, right?
Yeah, definitely. It takes work to do it right. And it's, as I always say, it's easy to field a survey. It's hard to run a survey program, because taking that action is really where the work begins. And for employee surveys, I would say especially, there's that real expectation of back and forth communication. And so if you just get a sense that I've talked and it just went into this black box and nothing was done with it, then you take less stock in it, and it matters less to you over time.
And guess what? Your internal communication scores are going to go down on the next employee survey. Right? Like if you get that feedback and you don't respond back. And here's the thing. Employees aren't expecting the world. They're expecting, and they don't expect their specific comments necessarily to be addressed. All they're expecting for the most part is, hey, I've been heard, or my team has been heard, or the company's been heard. You're going to do something. It doesn't have to be 10 things. It can be one thing. And then just tell me how it's going. And this is probably another topic sometime for PeopleMetrics Live, but one of the biggest mistakes in survey programs is folks try to do too much. Like they'll see 10 items that they want to fix because either there are low scores or they're key drivers of engagement and experience. And then they set out to do that, and then they just can't because they get spread too thin. The employees then they're not doing anything again. And then leadership's like, this isn't worth it. But if they do what we do, our recommendation is always do one organizational priority, have one across the organization, and let work groups, teams, however you're organized, take their own unique one. They typically can handle that. And communication is a huge part of of change management, right? Like getting those things done and implemented and changed it's all about communication.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And I think what we're really touching on here is how intertwined these two things are. Is communicating company updates and priorities is very intertwined with employees communicating back with you, because you want to hear from employees what's important to them, so you know what to say in the first place and what to act on. And then if you don't take action on what they say to you, then they're less inclined to provide feedback, and then they're less inclined to care or take stock in what you're communicating to them. So these things feed into each other, and is why you need to have kind of these consistent communication channels out to employees where you're taking action and making clear what you're doing, and provide them safe and anonymous communication channels where they can give feedback to you and tell you what they think is best for you to do next.
So our last tip is to encourage employees to be grateful and enthusiastic about their work. And Madeline, as you know, PeopleMetrics, we have our own sort of way to encourage this. Internal communication isn't just leadership to managers and employees. It's communication between teammates, right?
Yeah,
Maybe, Madeline, why don't you talk a little bit about what we do every Friday, since you're involved in it, and I know you like it.
Yeah, I do like it. So every Friday at PeopleMetrics, we, like Sean said, we have our all hands meeting, and we go around at the end of the meeting, and every person on our team will say, we'll call out someone that they're grateful for on the team, which I'll get back to, and also just say something that they're grateful for in their lives. So we've heard, I love this because it's opening two different channels of a person, right? There's the part about work, where you're thanking your teammates for the great work that they've done that week. It's not just, oh, thanks, you're great. It's like, we were working on this thing together, and you stepped in and did that awesome outline, and it was so helpful for me, and thank you. And there, it's speaking about teamwork and all of the great things that come with working together. And then it's also showcasing to everyone else on the team, just how great everybody else is on the team as well. And then on the personal side, I'm thankful for my family. Obviously, we're all very thankful for our health and well-being these days. And it's nice to just kind of get a little window into people's personal lives, see what's going on with them. It's a good way to just stay connected with everyone that way. So it's been a great exercise. I don't even know how many weeks we've been doing it now at this point, but
I think it's ever since we went remote, we did that. Mm-hmm. And we end the meeting that way. So we do typical company meeting stuff before it in terms of updates. And if there's product things we need to share, we do so. If there's, policy changes, whatever, but we always end it like that. And it never seems to get old. And it's because of what you said, Madeline. It's unique every time. You get to know about a person, what they're grateful for today. And then we're all doing different work so often that most people are like shouting out, we call it shout outs, but thankful for different people all the time. And the other neat thing is it does link to our company values too. So it's a way to kind of show everyone the values we have in the company in action. It's really a highly effective, I think, internal communications, tangible exercise that, bigger companies than ours could be doing this on work groups, or it doesn't have to be the whole company. It can be teams, however you'd want to structure it.
Yeah, and that I think is a great point of this action that we do, which is one of many actions of kind of just conversational, casual actions, is that communication in a company isn't just informative, it is cultural. And especially now that a lot of us are working remote, not everyone, but when you're working remote, you lose that ability to have just that day-to-day conversation that you would normally have just passing by or talking to a coworker. And if you're in HR and you're responsible for how do we keep a good and sustainable company culture, how do we keep people informed, you need to make sure you're not just conveying information, but you're giving an opportunity for people to talk and interact in a way that we learn things about each other, just hearing what you're grateful about in your day-to-day. That ultimately makes me glad I work at PeopleMetrics.
Absolutely. So those are the main tips that we've had. And Madeline, do we have any questions that we can answer from the audience?
Yeah, I had a couple come in here. One is just asking how to measure the effectiveness of internal communications.
Right. So I think that gets into the surveys that we talked about. That's really the best way we've seen. And we've asked just a straight up, how satisfied are you with the internal communications type question in our surveys. We've also specifically asked about leadership and manager communication, how effective that is on sort of an agreement scale. Right, Kirk, you've done a lot of these. What else do you think? What other ideas do you have there?
Yeah, and I think open-ended comments are going to be very helpful here. And what I would say, you don't need to get too granular, especially if this is you're just starting off, because the fact is communication is a driver. It is going to be top of mind. So this is something that folks are going to just communicate to you what they feel is missing. And so if you are getting to those core pieces that Sean mentioned of how do you feel about our internal communication? How do I feel about internal communication at different levels of the organization? And then an open end for people to elaborate. That's going to give you a lot to start with and a lot to dig into from there.
Here, I'll throw out just another sort of out of the box idea. So if you find that internal communication is an issue within the company after a survey that you just did, through some of these questions, and you really want to dig in deeper, one technique that we've used that's really effective is something called an online focus group that's anonymous. So it's asynchronous, meaning it's not happening all at once. You can come on any time. It lasts over a number of days, and you can really get into in depth on what's going on with communications right now and what people would like to see. So it's almost like a focus group, but people are online. So you're asking things like, what are the most effective examples of internal communications you've seen at the company to date? What types of communication didn't really resonate with you? What would you recommend in terms of communication being improved? What modes do you think we should use that we're not using today? Give us an example of a time when that communication really made you feel left out and why. And people can type in like in-depth answers, and they can go back and forth between the different people in the groups. And again, it's all anonymous. We run these for our clients. We assign, just an anonymous, usually it's a Greek alphabet name to each employee. So nobody knows who anybody is, but they're all able to provide really clear and honest feedback. And that's a topic that we've seen used before.
Yeah. And I think generally process-wise, what you want to do is start with measure, then take action, and then remeasure, and then find out what's the delta. Has what we've done helped? And so depending on kind of what your communication gaps are, if you start with that employee survey and you find, it's very clear from kind of the open-ended feedback and from the ratings what you need to do, then you can move straight to taking action. That was, in the PeopleMetrics story I gave, it was very clear as far as, we can incorporate this Slack channel, we can add this as a company-wide communication method. However, if, as Sean mentioned, it's something more precise, you can start with the employee survey, then something that's more targeted, like that e-focus group. Then you can take that action and remeasure after that's completed and see how it's changed.
Awesome.
What else do we have, Madeline?
I don't think we have anything else for today. I just thank you both for this conversation. I wanted to just say that I really like what you were saying about the one thing, right? Having that iterative process where, if you're able to pick one thing to work on and communicate that effectively to your employees, that's something you're working on now, you're then kind of putting yourself into that loop, like you said, Kirk, of now we're going to implement that and ask you again how things are going. And then maybe another thing comes up after that. So I think that's just a good way to think about these programs as being something that's iterative and ongoing, and you don't have to do it all at once.
Right. And people are bombarded with all sorts of communication across their lives, right? And work is no exception. So when you're trying to make a change to improve the experience, really focusing is an enormous benefit. And your employees will thank you, and it'll make your life easier. And like Kirk said, that you can truly measure, take action, and measure again when it's one thing that you're trying to change.
Right. Exactly. Well, I know we're at 2:30, so I want to thank you both for this conversation and thank you all for joining us for PeopleMetrics Live today. If you have any friends or colleagues that couldn't make it to this session, there's no worries there. We've got recordings of this session and all previous sessions of PeopleMetrics Live on our YouTube channel, so be sure to check that out. And you can also follow us on LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. For more reading on employee experience, you can go to our blog at www.peoplemetrics.com/ex-blog. And also, if you're interested in taking a deeper dive on CX, on customer experience measurement, you should definitely check out Sean's book. It's called Listen or Die, 40 Lessons That Turn Customer Feedback into Gold, and that's available on Amazon. A lot of those lessons also apply to employee experience programs, of course, but that one does focus on CX. And like I said earlier, we do have a couple more sessions of PeopleMetrics Live coming up next week. We're going to be talking about the best VOC alerts for CX programs on Tuesday, the 17th. And on the 19th, we're going to be providing some ideas for how to creatively recognize your employees in 2020 without also spending a fortune. So you don't want to miss those as we're going into the holidays. And you can sign up for those again at peoplemetrics.com/events. And as always, we love to hear from you. So keep sending your questions our way. We've got some more topics coming up that we'll be touching on in the future. So be sure to keep checking in with us for those. Thanks again for joining and have a great rest of your day, everybody.